Hello, everyone. My name is Kit Carroll, and I'm here today to talk to you about the conviction to lead. The generation that will simultaneously lead with conviction while being driven by a conviction to lead will set the world on fire. That is a high aspiration, to set the world on fire, and that is what Albert Mohler is pushing leaders to in his book. Albert Mohler doesn't seek to merely add another voice to the conversation, but to fundamentally change the way Christian leadership is understood and practiced. During the course of this presentation, we will be going over a brief summary of the book, what the book actually teaches on leadership, and an analysis of the book's content. So with that being said, let's begin. Albert Mohler wrote the book. He is the president of Southern Baptist Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. He was the youngest president of a major seminary in history when he took over at the age of 33. He is on the board of many organizations and leadership communities and is often sought to teach on leadership around the country and around the world. He wrote this book at the urging of other leaders, basically because he had many friends and colleagues that thought he was a very qualified source and that he should put together some of his thoughts on leadership, because what they were seeing in the leadership discussion wasn't producing fruit, and they saw Albert Mohler as someone who produced leaders not only at the seminary but in all aspects of life, and they wanted him to get his thoughts, as well as Albert Mohler himself, but ultimately that's why he wrote the book, as he explains in the first chapter. The book is intended for Christians specifically. We will talk about it later, but I believe there are many principles that Albert Mohler goes over that can be useful for Christian or non, but he's very clear that the book is written for Christians and will be best understood by Christians. One of the main theses of his book, and what we see throughout it, throughout all of the principles, is that a concept that leadership must have a foundation in truth, and a foundation in truth will produce leadership. It's this constant seesaw of those two ideas that are interconnected, and with that in mind, he's portraying everything from a Christian worldview. So the thesis of his book in general is this idea that having a foundation in Christian truth will produce true Christian leadership. So that's his targeted audience. As he goes through the book, in the subtitle of the book, there's 25 principles to leadership he examines. These principles are broken down into two categories, really, and they could kind of be broken down into the way leaders respond and act on the world we live in, and the characteristics leaders should possess. I don't have time to go into all of the 25 principles and what he teaches on all of them. But what I mean by some of the categories are more how leaders respond and act on the world. He has a chapter called The Leader and the Media, or The Digital Leader, or Leadership and Credibility. And so he addresses these things in these chapters of how do we as leaders react to in consistent ways based on the Christian worldview that we hold. How do we react to these things in consistent ways that will produce leadership? The second way he kind of breaks the contents or the chapters down into is the characteristics of leaders, and that's when he has chapters that are titled things like leaders are thinkers, leaders are teachers, leaders are readers. And so he's saying that common characteristics, he'll have a whole chapter called Leaders are Readers, and he'll explain the benefits to reading that are essential to a leader to have, that he must be reading constantly as a form of gaining information and bettering himself, that he has to be a thinker. Leaders are thinkers is another chapter. This idea that leaders constantly thinking. Leaders are communicators. A good leader will constantly communicate what he's trying to get across. And these are all things that throughout the different chapters Albert Mohler is trying to convey. he really believes that what you believe shapes how you lead, or if you lead at all. So a lot of leadership books he critiques and says will, talk about like being leader in momentary times, but he's arguing that without a solid foundation, there will be no consistency through leadership, and leaders will ultimately fail. And as he addresses kind of the end of leadership and the legacy of leaders at the end, this really comes into play with whether you lead is going to be based on what your worldview is and what things you hold to be true and true consistently and affect all areas of a leader's life. So ultimately, it's this idea that having a Christian worldview will produce distinct leadership as opposed to what others might say momentary acts of leadership or leaderly things. Similarly, he points out how we'll call a student might have a scholarly writing, but that doesn't make him a scholar. Just like many people can be leaderly or do leaderly acts, but that doesn't make them a leader. To continue, I believe the book uses quality sources. He has a whole chapter length worth of notes at the end of the book, and quotes things from other leadership books to historical figures to historical speeches. Movies, a lot of things that are accepted by the at-large secular and Christian community as valid resources, and his experience himself by being a president of a seminary and being in the leadership roles he is qualify him as well. There are several things that the book teaches that confirm what things we've learned in the class, confirm certain things we've learned in the class. There's a lot that we've learned in this class about servant-hearted leadership, and he definitely pushes that as it is a main element to a Christian worldview, is this idea of servanthood. And so he impresses that is a main characteristic of a leader and devotes a whole chapter to it. And so that would agree with many things we learn in this class. I mentioned this earlier, but I believe that some things in this class have pointed out very momentary or temporary leadership that doesn't necessarily require a consistency in, but it's an idea that we've seen in some videos and some articles where leaders, it will define a person as a leader if they do a leaderly thing. And the whole concept of his book is that leadership is distinct, and even more so distinct to those who claim Christ as opposed to a secular world. I don't think Albert Mohler would say there's no leaders in the secular world, but he's making a statement that there's a distinct leadership when this certain worldview is held, which I would argue is contrary to certain things in this class. I think he's very explanatory throughout his chapters. All the chapters are very thorough. Has many examples from a wide variety of sources. I think it's very easy to act out some of these things because he gives very real life examples of where this plays out in businesses, in families, in school, in all sorts of areas. So it's very explanatory in that nature in a great way. I believe some of the weaknesses of the book are it can appear to be kind of repetitive. I think that's hard to do for leadership to not be repetitive, since when you break it down into 25 principles, there's going to be a lot of overlap. So there's seemingly some chapters that maybe could have been one chapter, or when he has a chapter called the conviction to lead, and leading is believing, and the passion to lead. A lot of those things are very similar. Now he breaks them down and explains what his differences are, but they're very similar, all the same. And it also has many strengths, though. And the other weakness he might have is that it potentially uses too many personal examples, because not everyone is a seminary president, and not everything he uses as an example might apply to everyone. Some strengths are that it backs up its own thesis by being so thorough. This idea that you have to be founded in truth. Well, this truth is explained very thoroughly, what he believes on each principle. So it kind of backs itself up, gives it some validity. And it covers relevant leadership issues that are relevant to our time, like the media and like living in a digital age, that I don't see in a lot of other leadership books. So in conclusion, Albert Mohler doesn't seek to merely add another voice to the conversation, but to fundamentally change the way Christian leadership is understood and practiced. I'm not trying to just say, well, there's some good leadership things out there, but he's saying this is totally different than what is at large understood about leadership. I would recommend this to any Christian or non-Christian leader or aspiring leader because their principles are very helpful, I think very applicable. So in conclusion, we have looked at a brief summary of the book, what the book actually teaches on leadership, and an analysis of the book's content, and I would highly recommend that you would go buy this book today. Thank you.